else. And I don't even know how that happened, but I know that it was my fault. So I usually know when things go wrong that it's my fault. So I'm really glad to be here, and it's nice for me to catch up with friends as well. Des and Dorothy Limkin have been friends of ours for ages, and I didn't know they were here at this church, so it's really nice to see friendly faces. Not that you're all not friendly. You're all friendly. You are probably used to expository preaching, and that's really not what I'm gifted at, but I do feel as if God's given me a message for you today. My husband will be with us tonight, and he is an expository preacher, and I've listened online to Ray, and I believe he is as well, so you're blessed with that. Peter is the Vice Principal of Malyon College, and if you want to get study at a great college, Malyon is just doing amazing things at the moment. They have about 250 students. That's across full-time and part-time. They have night lessons as well, and it is just a really great place to be. And I'm blessed because my office is actually within the Malyon College campus as well, and so if I'm not sure of anything, I can always run over and ask one of the lecturers, which is very helpful for me at times. So I work for the Australian Christian Lobby, and in that role, we're just seeking to actually bring Christian influence into Parliament, into community, into every decision that is made throughout Australia, and to maintain a sense of understanding of where we've come from and the difference that making godly decisions actually makes in our world. And I think we can all see some of the decisions that have been made recently that have really gone against what God would really want us to do. And so the main thing I want to actually leave with you today is this very first slide. And I guess I could leave it up there and we could just sit here and meditate on that, and that would actually be enough for us today. To speak truth in love. I believe that today, perhaps more than ever before in my lifetime, the need to speak truth is so very important. But the tone with which we speak truth is equally important. God said that if we speak the truth and we don't speak it in love, then it will just be a clanging cymbal. And so that we need so very carefully to speak the truth and to speak that with the tone of love, because that is what Jesus did, and that's what he's asked us to do. And so truth in love to me is so important. But the question comes, what is truth? Because everybody has their own sense of truth, particularly today. And never before, never since, again, has the question been so incredibly poignantly asked than Pilate asking Jesus at the trial, saying, what is truth? That is one of the things that just sticks in my mind, that I guess when I get to heaven, I just want to sort of work that out, how that was just so incredibly, deep question, and he was actually standing in front of the person who is the truth. And so when we ask the question, what is truth, I think what we really need to be asking is, who is truth? And that would have been a better question for Pilate to be asking at that time, because he was standing in front of the one who actually is the truth. And so when we are talking about speaking the truth in love, we're actually talking about speaking Jesus in love. How could you speak Jesus in any other way other than speaking him in love? And we have to go back always to what Jesus actually said to find the truth. And so when we're talking about the truth, we're not just talking about abstract concepts that we perhaps find in the Bible or in other places around in books and things. We're actually talking about a person. And so we have to go back to Jesus to find what that truth actually is. So how do we find truth in a person? That just seems a little bit weird. Well, we go back to Jesus, and Jesus said in this verse in John, he said, if you abide in my word and you are truly my disciples, you will know the truth. So to find that truth that we're talking about, the truth that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth and the life. Jesus is the truth. To find that truth, we go back to his word and we abide in his word, and we will know the truth. And that truth will set us free. And I can tell you, and you would know yourself from personal experience, what Australians and what the world is actually looking for is to be set free. To be set free from their past mistakes, Which one of us hasn't made mistakes that we would want to be free from? To be set free from pain, to be set free from guilt, or to be set free from some besetting sin. That is what the world is looking for. And Jesus said, if you abide in my word, you'll know the truth. So we're wanting to, this morning, concentrate on speaking the truth in love. That truth is going to set us free. So when we say that the truth will set us free, does that mean that we're just free to do whatever we want to do? We're just free. Well, freedom is something that comes with boundaries. And freedom is something in God's word that comes with his instruction on how best to live out that freedom, how he chooses to live that freedom. Because we go back to truth. The truth is not just our truth. So we're not free just to live our own truth. We're free to understand what the truth really is. And the truth is Jesus Christ. And we go back to that truth all of the time. And so we go back to what Jesus told us in his word, because if we abide in his word, we will know the truth, and that truth will set us free. And so we go back to his word and we find out, how is it that you want us to actually live out this freedom that you have given us? How is it that you want us to live out this truth and to speak this truth in love? And this is one of the ways that he tells us in Matthew 5:13 to 16. He explains to us that he wants us to be salt and light. And he explains to us how he wants us to actually affect the world that we're in. Salt and light are two things that don't enter into any situation without actually making a difference and without being known. You don't add salt accidentally to your tea instead of sugar and not realise that you've made an error. So salt, you don't add salt without being known that salt is there. And you certainly don't turn on a light in a dark room and not notice it. Light is so incredibly invasive, and it removes the darkness. And so salt and light are both amazingly good things. Salt preserves, salt flavours, salt has so many good properties, and that is what God wants us to be in our world. He wants us to preserve goodness. He wants us to stop things from going bad. He wants us to flavour where we are. And light, obviously, I don't need to even really say how good light is. Light guides us, it shows us the way, it illuminates the way that we're going. Light helps somebody else. If you're walking somewhere and you shine the light, it helps them to know where they're going. Light is incredibly good. But these two things also come at a price. If you have a wound and you bathe that in salt, it is going to be good for it, but it will sting. Salt can sting if there's an open wound. And as we are salt in the world, there are times when the truth that we say will actually sting because there might be an open wound. And so even though we speak the truth in love, there are times when that truth will actually create a reaction that might be a hurt reaction. And light is the same. Light is, light is so good. But if somebody was coming into your carport at night and you have an automatic light like we do, if I come home late at night, an automatic light comes on so that I can see where to put the key. So it's a really good thing for me. But if somebody came in to steal my car at night, that light would come on as well, that automatic sensor light, and it would not be good for them. They would not like that light coming on because it exposes something that they're doing that is wrong. And so whilst salt and light are good things and God calls us to do those good things, there are times, and I certainly experience this, there are times when you speak the truth in love and the reaction that you get is not one of appreciation. But does that mean then that we just speak the truth where this truth will not cause any aggravation? Or are we called to speak the whole truth? Are we called to speak truth into places where it might sometimes cause a reaction that people don't necessarily like? Are we called to speak truth when there is sometimes pushback on the truth that we're saying? Well, I would posit to you this morning that yes, we are actually called to speak truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, but we're also to speak that truth in love. So our tone really matters, and our tone is very important when we speak the truth. But I do believe that we must speak the truth into all areas. William Carey is one of my heroes. and he was a missionary. He went to India. He was originally a cobbler, a very ordinary man, but he put up on his wall a map of the world, and he started praying around the world for the countries. He would find out everything he could about the countries around the world, and he would pray for them. And he ended up going to India. He's called the father of missions. And he believed wholeheartedly that he was called to bring the gospel to India. And so he went to India and brought the gospel. But as he took the gospel, he took the whole truth of the gospel. I think we miss the point if we think that the gospel is just about you and I coming to Jesus, asking him to forgive our sins, receiving him into our heart, and having the assurance of salvation and going to be with him after we die. That is part of the gospel. But the gospel is also about redemption, not just of our own souls, but redemption of our communities, redemption of our culture, redemption that we actually are salt and light in our communities, and we're bringing about good in our communities. That's part of the gospel as well. And so William Carey, as he went, he affected so many things. He changed the situation where widows were being burned. If their husbands died, widows were being burned. Children were being sacrificed. He opened up homes for orphan children. He did some of the most amazing work that you can imagine, and I encourage you to look into his life. He was in English, but he was inspired to missions firstly by reading The Last Voyage of Captain Cook. So I think we can claim some sort of claim to fame because Captain Cook wrote this amazing last voyage story of what he had encountered on his travels, and this had actually really inspired William Carey. But William Carey wrote an essay, and it was called The Inquiry, and the question that was the title of the essay was what you've seen up there. Are Christians under an obligation to help transform societies that live in intellectual, moral, social, political and spiritual darkness? And the answer was obviously implicit in what he was asking, and it was yes, he believed so. He believed that the gospel is good news for every individual, but it's also good news when you speak into asylum seekers. It's good news when you speak into persecuted Christians and Indigenous communities, into homelessness and poverty, into mental illness, into prostitution and into trafficking, into every area that you can imagine that we are currently facing around our globe. The gospel is good news. And we are the bearer of that good news. We are the ones who know the truth because we know the person of Jesus Christ. And as we abide in his word and we abide in that truth, then that truth sets us free, and it sets us free to be actually purveyors of that truth to the world. William Carey was a man of great prayer, and I wish I could say I was a woman of great prayer, and I strive to be, but I find it hard to pray. Charles Spurgeon said something that I find encouraging, but I don't want to be an excuse for you not to pray, but it is sometimes very encouraging to me. He said he very rarely spends 15 minutes dedicated in prayer, but he never goes 15 minutes without praying. So he lived in an attitude of praying. But William Carey was a man of great prayer, and I strive myself to be that because I believe, and this picture is obviously Daniel in the lion's den, the way that Daniel just maintained his habit of prayer so faithfully and in spite of political oppression against him is inspiring to me as well. And I believe that what I'm going to talk about, and I want to talk about some of the issues that we've been facing in Australia, we need to start on our knees. We need to start praying for our country, praying for our politicians, praying for Rick. He's not here now. Rick has to go to a different event, and I understand that as well. He's coming along this afternoon too, but praying for people like Rick, praying for our country, that's where it's going to start. And when you pray, Jesus said, pray like this, pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We know that prayer so well. We call it the Lord's Prayer, and I prayed it in school. We no longer would that happen very often in state schools where I grew up. But we prayed that every morning, our Father in heaven, and we prayed your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. How often have we prayed that prayer? And I don't believe that we can pray that prayer honestly unless we are prepared to be part of that solution. So when we say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, then what are we actually talking about when we talk about God's will being done on earth as it is in heaven? And again, I believe it's part of the gospel, because I believe that it's part of the redemption of our culture, the redemption of every situation that God actually wants to be part of. And so I am a grandmother now. I have 10, Peter and I have 10 grandchildren. The eldest is 14 and the youngest is 6. And so we've got 3 married children. And so it has freed me up to be involved in some advocacy and some campaigning. And I encourage all of us to know what's actually going on and to be involved to whatever extent we possibly can be, because Australia needs you. Australia needs the truth. Australia needs people who know the truth. And so I stand in lots of different situations that I wouldn't have believed I would have as a young girl. So I grew up in a lovely, very God-honouring home. My parents are still alive. They live down at Beenleigh now, and they're in their 80s, but they're godly. And I have not myself been caught up in prostitution. I have not myself had an abortion. I have not myself gone through a divorce. So I have been saved from a lot of pain. But I believe that we don't just minister out of experience, we also minister out of wholeness. And if God has saved you from something, it doesn't mean that you can't minister to others in that situation. And I believe with all my heart that if I had not had the parents that I had had, if I had not married a godly man, I could have been one of these girls who have been caught in the prostitution trade. And so they are survivors from prostitution. Many of them have chosen very alternate lifestyles. Many of them hate men now. But I love them and they love me. And when they are going to do a protest outside, this one they were protesting against Amnesty's new policy to actually decriminalise prostitution worldwide, which is just a total furphy. So they were protesting against Amnesty outside the Amnesty office, and they rang me and they said, Wendy, would you come and stand with us and bring Peter? So they hate men, but they're happy for Peter to come because they know that he's someone that they can trust, and he will stand there and he will actually bring some sort of protection for us. And we needed it. That night, as I stood alongside those girls and identified with them, I was subjected to some of the most vile comments, some of the worst invitations that I've ever had to subject myself to, and I did it proudly, and I was so glad to be there with them, because I believe that these girls are on a quest to find the truth. And unless us as people who know the truth, we know him personally as a person, and we know the truth by being in God's word, unless we are prepared to actually stand with them and understand what they're going through and to love them for Jesus' sake, then they will never know. And so we march for asylum seekers. I don't actually have a position against what the government does with the asylum seekers. I believe that we do need strong borders. I think it's very, very complicated. But I do believe that we need to stand with those who have come to our shores and who are needing love. And so we visit the detention centres, we walk with people who want to love people who have come from overseas from terrible situations, and we march for life. This is perhaps one of the most incredible wins that we have had in our country for decades, and that is when Queensland politicians ended up not even voting on the abortion legislation that was before them because they knew that they would actually lose, and so they didn't even come to a vote. We marched through the city of Brisbane. Normally we would have perhaps about 300 people because our legislation has always not really ever been in danger. But when our legislation looked like it was changing to allow abortion to birth for any reason, without any support for women, without any structure for women at all, women who are experiencing an unexpected or unwanted pregnancy were going to be completely left without any help at all, then the church rose up and the church marched in its thousands. We had 2 petitions, 55,000 people signed the petitions. It was quite amazing, and you'll recognise Rick standing there, and I really appreciated him doing that because he really was going against a lot of what his party actually was saying at the time, and so it was very brave, and he was very, very vocal over it. And this is not a political meeting, and so I'm not making any political statement, but I'm saying that he was extremely good. And so we had this group. That group that you can see up there represents, so Dr. Christian Rowan is in the blue shirt. He's LMP. Then we've got Senator, his name's gone from me, but the Pauline Hanson Senator. It's completely gone. Yellow shirt. Pauline Hanson, Senator, and then we've got Rick. So we've got all the parties there as well, so it was really good. And on the back of that Queensland win, and if we hadn't had that Queensland win, I do not believe this would have happened. We've just won in New South Wales as well. And so in New South Wales, they voted again against some of the worst abortion legislation you can imagine. Abortion to birth for any reason. Now, this is not actually what women want. What women want is options. What women want is to know what their options are, but this is saying an operation for abortion is exactly the same as an operation for tonsillitis. The only difference is that with tonsillitis you actually get a cooling off period, so you can decide about your options. With abortion you can have the abortion the same day. And so in New South Wales, just about 2 weeks ago, that vote was also won. It's not to say that it's actually an easy thing to do, because on that day when the vote was going to happen, there was a lot of people with signs saying that we didn't want this legislation to go through, but there were also very vocal and very angry people who opposed what we believe as well. Now, they have every right to be there and to say what they believe too. This is Australia, and I would actually defend their right to be able to say what they believe too. But it's intimidating when you're there and you're these quiet little Christian grandmothers and there's angry people who are very angry, because typically the ones who are saying we don't want abortion to birth for any reason are not angry people. But the people who are defending the right to abort often have had abortions themselves. And so what they're hearing from people like me, and I do try and really understand what they're hearing is that I'm just making them feel really guilty, and I'm actually more or less saying that they're a murderer. And I'm not. I'm actually not, because again, my parents and my husband, if I hadn't had that upbringing, I could easily have had abortion after abortion. And there is no guilt in Jesus Christ, and there is no shame in Jesus. And to have an abortion is no different than any other sin that I have done myself. And so I don't feel any condemnation to those people at all, no sense of judgment. How could I? How could I possibly have any sense of judgment or condemnation when I know what I am and I know what I've been forgiven? But it doesn't mean that we then abandon women or abandon babies and say, well, we won't have a word to say about it, because we are to speak the truth in love, and we are to be salt and light in our world. And if we're not actually speaking on these issues, then we are letting down our mandate. I really believe that. But what is happening is that a new pro-life generation is actually raising up. And my generation has actually really let people down, and the new generation is standing up and saying, do you know what? This is not actually what we want. And one of the reasons, I think, is because of this sort of thing. So if you're on Facebook and you know a young woman who becomes pregnant, you are likely to see the very first picture of her baby on Facebook, and it's a scan at 12 weeks. And that is a scan at 12 weeks. And so that funny little cartoon is looking on the ultrasound and it's saying share on Facebook, Twitter or YouTube. And you can choose. And so this is what happens. And so no longer is it very sensible or logical to actually believe that there's no baby in the womb, that it is just a blob of cells. It's impossible to actually believe that. And so the younger generation, the next pro-life generation that I'm calling it, is actually saying, do you know what? It doesn't make sense. And if that doesn't make sense, neither does this. And a lot of people are pushing for euthanasia at the moment. At the same time, we have huge issues about suicide. So we're trying so hard to actually stop the rampant suicide that we're seeing in Australia, and at the same time pushing for people to be allowed to have assisted suicide. The logicality just actually escapes me, but I'm not real bright, so maybe I've missed something. But people say to me, well, you can make euthanasia safe. No, actually, if the slippery slope argument works anywhere, and I know people say the slippery slope argument and they roll their eyes, if it's working anywhere, it works with euthanasia. Euthanasia of psychiatric patients is increasing around the world where euthanasia has been accepted, particularly in Belgium and Netherlands, and 70% of the psych patients that are euthanased in these countries are women. So 70% of the euthanasia happening for psychiatric patients are women. There was a Dutch woman recently who was physically restrained while she was euthanased because she had signed the paper to say that she was prepared to be euthanased, but she changed her mind. But she was a psychiatric patient and they held her down while they actually euthanased her. You can Google that and find that. I don't make up things because I don't need to. Belgium and Holland both have protocols now for euthanasing children. And so when you hear in Australia that they will say, well, we'll do it this way, we'll do it that way, no country that has introduced euthanasia has stopped at what they're saying. And I think the other thing to say about euthanasia is the incredible rise in elder abuse is a huge fact in Australia. And euthanasia plus elder abuse is a recipe for disaster. Sometimes I feel like this man, and this is one of my favourite photos in all the world. If you've seen it, or if you haven't, I encourage you again to go online and have a look for it. The photo is simply called the Tank Man, and he stood in front of a row of tanks in Tiananmen Square. And I've only just got the 3 tanks there because if I had the full photo, it would be hard to see the man. The tanks go on for probably, well, at least a kilometre, maybe even 2. They just go on and on and on. So much so that the people in the tanks at the end would have no idea why they had stopped. No idea at all. And the reason they stopped was because this man was brave enough just to stand out in front. One man stood in front of the tanks that just go on forever and ever. I don't know what happened to that man after this photo, but I do know that he held up those tanks and he saved a lot of people from being run over in Tiananmen Square. And I guess I want to be like that, but sometimes that's how you feel. Particularly when you're going against big corporations or big places that you feel like, how could I possibly make a difference? But like that man, we actually can make a difference. Each of our voices, it's surprising how much difference we can make. And so, Acacia Ridge Hotel have for the past 4 years been trying to get an adult licence. And what that means is basically a strip club. And what it would mean is that Brisbane would have its first strip club outside the CBD. So in the CBD in Fortitude Valley, they have these sort of places. And because those places are there, they put on extra police, they put on extra security, they change a whole lot of their lighting around those places when people come out to try and make them as safe as possible because they know that the danger increases. So now we're going to have Acacia Ridge, the only place in Brisbane, a suburb where this would be happening, not on my watch. And so I contacted the feminist groups in Brisbane and I said, what do you think? And they said, we're so with you. And the reason why I could contact the feminist groups is because I stand with the prostitutes and I stand with the asylum seekers and I know them and I get to know them and I love them and they know I do. And so the feminist groups letterboxed the entire neighbourhood. They went to the police. I went with them, but I dressed as feminist as I could, wore my faded jeans, and we just had a really massive campaign against this. Now, it's still going. 4 years later, they still have the application in. Every now and then I get called in for another meeting with QCAT, and my next meeting with QCAT is in about 2 weeks' time. And I have to go in and tell them why I believe that it's wrong. So Acacia Ridge is a family, like young families live in Acacia Ridge. It's not far from Brisbane, and so it's a cheaper place to live. So they're going to have an increase of people coming from all over Brisbane who want that sort of thing in their neighbourhood, because the parking will be so much better than going to the CBD, and because there's not the same level of security and police. Is that what any suburb wants? And is that really what we're looking for in this day, when we're looking for equality between men and women, and we decide that we can actually increase this sort of rubbish? So 4 years on, and we're still fighting, but 4 years on, it still hasn't happened. And so, you know, we can actually make a difference. The wicked campers have been, their registration is going to be taken away from them in Queensland if they register in Queensland. It's a small start, but it's something to get these offensive messages off our roads and to protect our children. We had a big fight over religious instruction in Queensland, and there might be RI teachers here, and the RI teachers rose up, and they were amazing, and I just sort of trailed in their footsteps, because they just said, no way are we going to get rid of religious instruction. What the government wanted to do was to move religious instruction out of school time and put it in lunch times or after school. And, you know, I grew up in this really great Christian home, and I tell you what, if RI had been in lunchtime or after school, I would not have been there because I wanted to play. I wanted to get out and be with my friends. So they were it was really the death of RI, but our teachers stood up. And the reason why our teachers stand up, and the reason why we fight against things like this in Acacia Ridge and against offensive messages in advertising and on the roads, is because of this statement: the innocence of our children should be non-negotiable. And this is one of the big things that we're fighting in Australia today. We're fighting for the innocence of our children. And so back in 2010, I started a campaign, and we put up billboards. People helped me fund them, and we just basically said outdoor advertising should be G-rated. I still stand by that. I don't know why it doesn't make sense when we're in a public space that we shouldn't have advertising that is suitable for children. We want our children to be out in our public spaces. But unfortunately, it's not just our public spaces, but it's also what I've got here with my notes on it. So when a child gets a phone or an iPad or a computer, in Australia, the default is that they get absolutely everything. They get everything that you and I get. That's the default. So parents then have to make sure that they find out what the latest filters are. They need to find out how to keep them updated. They need to continually update them, sometimes more than a daily basis, to actually fight against things coming through that filter. And even then, beside Telstra, you'll have a stream of advertising that I believe is completely offensive and not suitable for children. And so in Australia, the default is children get everything. In the UK, the default is that it's a clean feed. So everybody, when they get their, whatever this is, when they get their equipment, it's a clean feed. So then I, as an adult, can opt in to receive whatever I want to, as long as it's legal. But the default is clean. Now, if anybody tells me that the UK has a slower internet speed than us, I would be very, very surprised. So don't tell me that it slows down the internet, and don't tell me that it doesn't work. And even if it did slow it down by a millisecond, isn't the innocence of our children actually worth that? And so we're fighting for that. And one of the reasons we're fighting for that is because our children are actually being bombarded from every angle, not just in public spaces, not just on their iPads and their iPhones, but also at school. And so we've been really very active in the space against safe schools. Now, safe schools sounds safe, but it's actually a really diabolical program that is encouraging children to understand and to explore whether their sexuality is as a male or female, or whether they might be something in between. It gets them to understand what transgender is. It gets them to understand a whole lot of things way before they are old enough to understand. And so what we're finding is that referrals to the Children's Hospital at Westmead have tripled. The doctors are saying they've escalated rapidly, and this is for children who are wanting to actually change their gender. It's frightening, and it's very unfair. One thing that is happening in Queensland, and I encourage you to keep an eye out for this, is that there's an inquiry into all education that is educating our children for anything on a sexual basis. And Rick Williams is part of this inquiry. He's on the committee. So it would be really good this week to contact Rick and say, first of all, thank you for being front and foremost in that photo that I saw at the abortion rally. Thank you. We really appreciate that. And please let us know about the inquiry and what we can do about it and what we can know, because our children really need to be protected at school. Our children are facing some of the most challenging times themselves. In the Bible, there's an awful story. One of those stories that you don't read at night time, and one of those stories that you actually don't read at all unless you come to it. And it's in Judges, and it was the one where there's a woman who is completely abused by her husband and many other men, and she ends up dying. She ends up being cut up and sent out around the district. It's an awful story. I actually don't encourage you to read it in one way, but at the end of that story, there's the most amazing verse, and this is it. Because when all that happened, the people of Israel looked at what had happened, and this is what the Bible says that they said. They said, think about it. What are we going to do? Who's going to speak up? Because they realised that their country and their nation and their people were in a dire position when something so awful could happen. And so this is what they said to each other. And I guess this is where I want to probably leave you with today. We've got to think about it. What are we going to do, and who's going to speak up? There are people speaking up. There are people you can support. There are people you can pray for. And I also really believe in my heart so strongly that our children need us to actually help them to know how to navigate this world that they're in.